Hey everyone, it's Ivan with KidBadger.com, here to bring you what will be part one in a short Throwback Thursday series on my Grandpa Ray's experience in World War II in the Navy.
Okay, my name is Ray Loyd. I was born in Bakersfield, California on September the 8th, 1923. I attended school there and graduated in the class of 1942. And the war had been going for about 6 months, World War II. And after I got out of school, I graduated at 17, so I decided I'd join the Navy. So I went down to the recruiting office and joined the Navy on the 4th of July, 1942. And it wasn't long until I found myself in boot camp down in San Diego. And they were running the men through boot camp so fast. I just spent 21 days in boot camp, and then we were broke up into groups, and I caught a train that took me from San Diego to Oakland, and everything was top secret military. The blinds were all pulled down on the train, and we got into Oakland. They made us stay on the train till after dark. Then we got off of the train and got on some trucks, and they hauled us down to the waterfront in the dark and put us on a large transport. I think it had been a small ocean liner at one time, and we weren't allowed to come topside. We had to stay down below. And then the ship left that morning, and after we had gone under the Golden Gate Bridge and was out there maybe 5 or 6 miles, they let everybody that wanted to come topside. By that time, 3/4 of the guys that was on board was seasick, and I guess I'm fortunate. I've never been seasick a minute in my life. So anyway, we took us about 3 days, 4 nights and 3 days or something like that to get to Hawaii. And we pulled into Pearl Harbor. We unloaded. They put us on buses, and they took us down to where the barracks were being built. They was just frames, just subfloor, and 2x4 framing, no roof on them or anything. So we had our sea bags and everything, and we just went in there and laid down on the floor that night. And of course it had to rain 2 or 3 times. That made it real nice with all our gear. So anyway, the next morning the sun come up. The bus come by and picked us up, took us to a big mess hall. We had breakfast. They came back and we got our gear out of the framework there, and then they started calling off names. So I ended up with about maybe 12, 14 guys that I'd gone through boot camp with, and they took us down to the waterfront and lined us up there, and there was a heavy cruiser sitting there. The name of the cruiser was the Portland. So I was standing there with the rest of the guys, and a Marine officer came down off of the cruiser, and he told the guy in charge of us there that he wanted the 3 tallest men that there. So I was 6'4" at the time, so of course I was one of them. And then he called us off to the side. There was 3 tall guys, and he told each one of us the name of a sergeant to look up. So I went aboard a ship where I'd never been on for 5 minutes before and started trying to find a Marine sergeant. Finally, I got directed around enough to where he was, and I told him that the officer had sent me to see him about, and I didn't know what for, but he happened to be a gun captain on one of the open deck 5-inch guns. And when he found out I was going to be on his gun crew, 17-year-old, no experience, and they'd been through quite a bit of combat already. But anyway, he finally choked his temper back a little, and he told one of the Marines to take me up and show me what I had to do on the gun during battles, so that's general quarters, what have you. So this Marine took me up there, took me through everything that I had to do, and then he left me. And so I got my gear, and there was no place for her to put our gear because the cruiser had never had a chance to stop since the war started to get room for more men, more bunks and stuff. So we put our new stuff into our sleeping bags and what have you in the hangar there. And so anyway, after that, there was no bunk for me. So I got one blanket out of my sea bag there and took it up by the gun, and I found a place to hide it. And I'd hide my blanket there in the daytime, so when any inspection came around, why, it'd be out of sight. And the whole time I was on the Portland, that's what I had. I had that blanket. I'd sleep by the gun at night, and I'd take my shoes off and shove them under the blanket, and that was my pillow. That was my career on the Portland when it come to sleeping. And anyway, after I spent a night there sleeping by the gun, and I got up in the morning, and of course Pearl Harbor was still a madhouse. There was still, ships were still sunk there in the harbor, and the harbor was polluted with oil from all the ships being sunk. And they had oil skimmers running 24 hours a day trying to clean up the oil. And they had divers coming from anywhere, I guess, in the world to dive on those ships, the Navy divers and civilian divers both. They was working around the clock day and night to raise the ships that they could save, which they did. And of course, the Arizona, it's still there. But anyway, the harbor was a real mess. And everybody was on the high alert because they figured there'd probably be another air attack, but there never was. And Portland was a heavy cruiser, so that was just under a battleship. And we had 9 8-inch guns on it and 3 turrets. And we had 4 5-inch 50 5-inch guns, and then the rest were automatic weapons, 20 millimeters. And in those early days of the war, they had what we called a British pom-pom. It was a short barrel thing that had kind of like a funnel on the end of the barrel. And every so often one of those funnels would explode. And it was a pretty dangerous gun to be on, but they kept that gun on until they got the 40 millimeters out. And then from then on, it was 40 millimeters and 20 millimeters, plus the 5-inch and the 8 inches. So we could put up a pretty good barrage. And when I guess we'd been there about 3 days, and there was a big cable running around our ship. And of course, I didn't know what it was, so I asked one of the guys, and they told me there was a degaussing cable that demagnetized the ship so that it wouldn't attract mines in the ocean, magnetic mines and stuff. It made them more or less neutral. And the cable turned out, me being a young sailor, didn't understand a lot of stuff, and it turned out we were degaussing the whole ship, which meant taking the magnetic draw that it might have away so that the mines and the ocean, the magnetic mines and stuff wouldn't be attracted to us. But anyhow, I think we were in Pearl Harbor about 3 or 4 days after I went aboard, and then we got underway. And in those days, when you left the harbor at Pearl Harbor, it was the general quarters, and the same way when you came back in the harbor. So we went to general quarters, and I was up there on my gun, and I was the only sailor. All the rest of the gun crew was Marines. And so we went on out of Pearl Harbor, and I looked around and we were the only ship, and I says to one of the Marines that would talk to me, most of them didn't have much use for me, I asked him, where's the rest of the ships? Aren't we supposed to be, in a group of ships? And he said, no. He says, we're a raider. He says, we don't even fly a flag. He said, look back at the stern and see if you see a flag back there. And I said, nope, don't see one. He says, well, we don't fly a flag when we're a raider. So anyway, we took off, and a few days and nights later, we went to general quarters early in the morning, and we approached Tarawa, and that's an island that a few months later that the Marines invaded. But anyway, we went in there, and we launched both our planes, and they flew over, and when they started their dives on the ships there, we opened fire with the main battery, and there was a Japanese cruiser in there, and 2 or 3 destroyers and a couple of cargo ships, and a radio apparatus on setting up on pilings, and our first salvo took that out, so they couldn't communicate, but of course the ships are still able to. Anyway, we shot up 3 transports and sank 1 destroyer and damaged another and damaged the cruiser. So anyway, it was first combat for me, and that's the first time I ever saw incoming. And the salvo landed just off our port side right in front of my gun, and I took a step back, and the Marines never moved. And I says to myself, don't you ever step back again, and I never did. They had been through Battle Midway, and I don't know, they'd been in several battles before I even went aboard, so they knew the game, and I was starting to learn it. So anyhow, our radar picked up enemy aircraft coming after us, so we took off, and we picked up our 2 planes that we had launched, and that was the first time for me to see how they did that. People might wondering how you land a float plane out in the middle of the ocean, but what they do is they put a boom out with a cargo net on it and drag it alongside the ship, and they make a real hard turn, and when you make a hard turn, it knocks the ocean down and flattens it out, and planes come in and land on that slick spot, and they taxi up to the cargo net, and they have a hook on their float that catches in the cargo net, and then they put a hoist out and pick up that plane and swing it aboard and put it on board the ship on the catapults or wherever they decide they wanted, a hangar deck or whatever. So that was a new experience for me to see that take place. But anyway, the planes that was looking for us, enemy planes, couldn't find us, and then we rendezvoused with a anti-aircraft cruiser, the San Juan. I believe was the name of the ship. And then, of course, we started flying the flag because we were through being a raider. And we took off. And let's see, we went from there to, I don't know, anyway, I think down around New Hebrides somewhere. And then we left there with the carrier group because the Japanese carriers were coming and they were getting ready to try to invade northern Australia. So we had 2 carriers that weren't damaged and still operating, the Enterprise and the Hornet. And the Japanese had 4 carriers. Anyway, they with their invasion fleet, but we tangled with them, and they sank our carrier, the Hornet, and damaged the Enterprise. But anyway, we managed to do enough damage to them that they wouldn't have any air coverage when they got to Australia, so the whole invasion fleet turned back. And that was the extent of that. So then we went down and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we were in New Caledonia, down there in the New Hebrides Island somewhere, is the most advanced base that we had. So I think we went there and then reorganized, and then we got word that the Marines had already invaded Guadalcanal, and we hadn't been able to get any supplies into them for quite a while because we didn't have many ships, and the Japanese, of course, their fleet had never really been hurt, surface ships. So they'd come down every night and shell the Marines. So we had the Portland, the San Francisco, a heavy cruiser, Helena, a light 6-inch cruiser, and the Juno, and the San Juan, and some destroyers with us. So we took these 3 supply ships in, and they were unloading, and I guess probably an hour or 2 after sunrise, we'd already been on our guns all that night at general quarters, and here come a large air attack, twin engine, we called them Bettys, twin engine torpedo bombers or level bombers, whatever they wanted to use them for. They came in on us, and we blocked them off from the cargo ships. We just so we could broadside them, and that's what we did. And we really knocked a bunch of them down. And one of them was on fire and out of control that flew into the cruiser San Francisco. Killed a lot of men. A lot of officers died along with that. Anyway, the air attack was over and kept unloading the cargo ships, and then they decided it was getting too dangerous for that anymore. So about dark, we gathered up the cargo ships and we took off, headed back to New Caledonia, and we were still at battle stations. And then about 10 or 11 o'clock at night, we got word that the Japanese fleet was coming down to shell the Marines again. So Admiral Halsey told we had 2 admirals there, to turn around and do the best we could. So we knew we were well outnumbered and outgunned. They had battleships, and the best we could do was cruisers and what have you. So we went back into the Guadalcanal area, and sure enough, here comes the Japanese fleet. And the Japanese at the time hadn't developed radar. So we knew where they were, and all our guns was locked in on different ships. And pretty soon the Japanese realized that there was somebody else there, and they turned on the searchlight. And when that searchlight came on, all hell broke loose. Every automatic weapon in our fleet went into that searchlight. And of course, the big guns all started in then, and we was locked in on a destroyer, one of their lead destroyers, and we gave them, I think it was 6-gun salvo, and it just practically disintegrated that destroyer. But just before we hit them, they had launched a spread of 4 torpedoes. And one of the torpedoes, we managed to, you could see them because of the wake in the water, and they turned the cruiser, but we still took one. We got hit in the stern, blew a large section of the stern off, and jammed that turret, the gun barrels just as high as they could go up. And then the wreckage started coming down, and I had, when the torpedo hit, I was taking a projectile from the fuel hoist to the gun to put in, and that particular 5-inch 50, it was just a big fixed projectile. And of course, when the torpedo hit us, the ship jumped about 6 feet in the air, and that shell went flying out of my arms and about broke both my hips. And when I came down and back on the deck, I was on my old fours, and I had no idea, what happened. But I knew something was going on that was bad, and stuff started coming down, and there was another explosion, and I saw 2 Marines in under a little skirt that hung off of the smokestack. So I dove in there on top of them, and pretty soon the wreckage quit coming down out of the air, big chunks of steel. And so we rolled back out from under there, and I knew that I had a live projectile rolling around there on the deck somewhere that I'd better find. And so I started looking for it, and I finally found it. And I put it in the fuse pot on the side of the gun and cranked it in, because we were firing star shells from our gun. And right after that, the best I can remember is the sergeant put me on alert search, and that's when you go out in front of the gun and you look around, and anything you see, you report to him. And of course, he's talking to the bridge, and they can pass the word along, whatever it is. But I didn't realize it at the time, but when the sun come up the next morning, there was a bunch of sailors on the gun, and the blood on my shoes was probably a 1/2 inch deep. And that was the end of the Marines being on that gun. I have no idea how many was killed, how many was hurt, nothing. And I think that's why the sergeant sent me to the alert search, was to get me out of the way when they was trying to get the guys out of there. But anyhow, I heard the sergeant holler at one of the Marines, "Where's the gun replacements I sent you after?" And the Marine hollered back at him, "They're all dead." And that's about the last thing I heard, other than guns going off, of course. And the battle was very short. It only lasted about 15 to 20 minutes. And in the first 2 minutes of that battle, both of our officers, our admirals, were dead. We had 4 doctors and a bunch of corpsmen. 3 of the doctors were dead and a bunch of corpsmen. We really took a beating there. And we were out of control because the torpedo had jammed our rudder over, so our captain kept our boat going as fast as he could, so we went right out, right through the Japanese fleet and back out the other side. But anyway, we had hurt them so bad in that opening salvo that we were locked in on that they didn't have any idea how many ships there were, so they decided to take off. So they took off. And we lost several ships. But anyway, the next morning, when it got daylight, I'm still on the splinter shield there, watching for whatever I could see. And then the other sailors come in and help man the gun. And we were out of control, and we was right in the middle of everything. When the sun come up, there was a Japanese destroyer out there a ways from us, so we sank that. And then way over by what they call Savo Island was a Japanese battleship that had been damaged too bad to get away. So anyway, they was around the corner of the island. You could just barely see part of their superstructure. And the planes from Henderson Airfield started bombing it right away as soon as they found out it was there.
Join me in part 2. We'll pick up right where we left off with my grandfather Ray's experience over there in the Pacific during World War II. And as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.